Hello, welcome. How's everybody doing? Oh,
Hello.
hello, hi. Got Sella and Joyce coming in. Hooray.
Are these regular students?
They are.
Oh,
They
nice.
are. Yeah, Joyce is here in town and Sella is in Florence, Montana. And we've got your friend coming in from Norway. And a few others coming in from here and there. So welcome everybody. I'm Jennifer from Little Metal Foxes with Lori Talcott today. And we're going to be talking a little bit about you and your studio and all good things and just sort of having a little tea and chat, and got some friends with us that may have some questions. So I thought we'd just sort of chat and enjoy it. I'm excited. I'm excited to be here.
I appreciate you inviting me.
Yeah, of course, of course. I love your studio. I love coming over here all the time because it's such a nice place to be. And I'm sure for you, this has got to be a little hideaway, getaway, wonderful inner sanctum that is.
It is.
Yeah, I know you enjoy your privacy, and this is very kind of you to admit us to it.
The little foxes are always welcome.
Well, thank you very much. So yeah, how are we doing on getting everybody in? Everybody,
I think we're
wandering in.
We've got Lynn, Sigrid, Bradland, and Kathleen, and
Sigrid.
Annie.
Hello. Yeah. So
we might have other people.
yeah. So for those of you that are coming along on this journey with us, feel free to make comments in the chat. Helen and Julia are moderating for us, and they can ask questions for you if you like. And welcome to it. Welcome to the interview. This is our first front row seat behind the scenes in the studio, and I'm really glad that we have Lori Talcott to do that with. She's wonderful to be our guinea pig and first interview. So we're really glad to be here. So Lori, we've been over here a couple of times and had wonderful cups of tea and coffee and enjoyed just sort of talking about your work and your experience and trying things on. So I feel very privileged to have been able to do that before.
Thank you.
But I just wanted to kind of share that experience with some friends and let them know what it's like to sort of be in a studio and enjoy that, sort of share ideas. But tell me, or tell them, let's talk a little bit about your family, because I know you've got a long line of metalsmiths and jewelers in the family and locally, right? That were Tacoma.
Well, Olympia, actually.
Olympia.
And I'm the last one of 5 generations.
Oh my gosh.
So I am very lucky that I have a lot of the tools that were from our store, jewelry store. This workbench, the watchmaker's bench over there, which I use as a soldering bench. And
just shows so much love, so much wear.
Yeah. Well, one thing I love is if you pull the drawer out, somebody for years had been the one on the left had been using it. The one on the left, they've been using it as a bench pen. You can see on the other side. So over on the left.
Over left. Oh, sorry.
They're right there.
Left side. Oh
Yeah,
my gosh,
you can
yes.
see where there wasn't a bench pen because it isn't a jeweler's bench, but they were, sizing rings and.
Oh god.
That I have a lot of the old tools from our store from my great grandfather. I have his goldsmithing hammer, which is engraved with his name.
Oh my gosh.
Or his monogram, and it's actually an amazing hammer because it's hardwood. And the neck is so skinny that it practically hammers itself. And what I always tell the students is let the tool do the work.
Right.
Let the saw, let the hammer. And this one practically hammers itself.
Yeah.
And,
and that's one of the things I think a lot of people forget about hammers and chasing tools.
Yeah.
That they're choke up on them and they're like, working so hard. And this one, God, it's beautifully
I know,
isn't it?
It's just perfect. And I use it mostly when I need a really tight riveting hammer to get into
Yeah.
a little space, like for a brooch or something.
Oh my gosh.
And yeah, so I really love the old tools. I use them all the time. And one thing I discovered at one point was when I was cleaning this bench and I took the drawer out, I saw after years and years that underneath here, my great grandfather had used it to hone his engraver.
Oh my gosh.
And I had done the same thing. So after you sharpen the graver, just jamming it underneath the drawer and stroking it back and forth.
Yeah,
And
takes the burrs off.
And he had done the same thing. And so I feel this sense of time. And he was an engraver. My dad was trained as a watchmaker. So was my great uncle.
Right.
And so, but I'm the last one of the family. My brother had our store and he closed that, I think in 2003.
Right.
And but I have my students.
I love the story about you telling them that you didn't want to do repairs.
Oh yeah, well, I think at one point when I left the business and went back to school to become a maker, which they thought I was crazy to do,
Right,
because they thought I was going to work in the store, take over the business, and my dad just assumed I was going to do repairs, and I said, no, I'm not going to do repairs. And he didn't think I could make a living if I didn't do repairs. But I'm not disparaging repair work, because the thing that it is so hard and is so specialized. Yeah. But also I love in the jewelry business, the idea of recycling, repairing, reusing. These are perennial things in the jewelry business that are all popular now, but they've always been.
Right.
So we were always repairing things, making everything.
Well, I was going to say, yeah, I mean, you guys were repairing, watches and umbrellas.
Everything, sewing machines, bicycles.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, they repaired and made everything, because this was even before Washington was a state. And there wasn't anything. You made screws, everything by hand.
Right.
And so I have a lot of those things that they made by hand.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so it's a very empowering thing to pass on to students as well. In this age where you go to the store and buy everything, is that I was brought up understanding that you could make anything.
Right.
But that it took skill and that you had to train to do it, but that you dove in and you learned how to do it.
And I'm just going to throw this in because I know that you had a class recently where you had to teach the students how to do things from scratch and make their own things. And that was something new for them.
Well, we really put a focus on hand tools in this class.
Yeah.
And learning how to use these hand tools that are used all over the world, historically and cross-culturally, which puts you in a matrix of, it's a delinear lineage in a way, going across cultures and time, when all of us are using these tools that are very basic tools, but doing beautiful and intricate work with them.
Right. And it's I think interesting for a lot of students now to realize that as little as 50 years ago, there was not access to the kinds of tools that we have now.
Right.
And
CAD and
or being able to the work the Egyptians and the Mesopotamians were doing. They didn't have a catalog that they could just we need some saw blades.
No.
So looking at the kind of work that has been done historically and understanding that those hand tools had to be made in order to be able to do the work that they do.
So we did make my students at this last class I taught, they made all their own gravers, and not in my class, but in a class after mine, they made hammers. So they and chasing tools. So I think it's a really important skill that
it is, and it's empowering too.
It's very empowering,
because you suddenly realize it's like, oh, I have control over being able to make the tool that I'm making things with,
right? And
that I don't have to rely on some outside agency to deliver the goods to be able to make the thing that I do. Yeah. Right. Oh gosh. Well, I know that you, after living in that for so long, you got your bachelor's degree and you ended up going to Norway to apprentice with a master goldsmith. And tell me what that experience is like.
Well, I did my undergraduate work at the University of Washington in metal design after previously getting a BA in art history, because I originally thought I was going to be an art historian. And then I sort of veered off course and decided I really wanted to make art and be a maker. Although the art history part, which we'll get back to, is is ever present in my work. So when I finished, while I was in school, I became really passionately interested in non-Western jewelry and folk jewelry, European folk jewelry.
Right.
I loved how spectacular it was. You can see these Spanish women. It broke all the rules that I learned in art school. It was oversized. It was extravagant. It was piles of things. I loved everything about it, and I was very intrigued with it. And mostly I was intrigued with how it was related as a ritual object in ritual things. So I became very interested in that. And I found out that Norway was one of the last places in Europe that had a living folk tradition. And so I contacted, long story short, I contacted a master silversmith who was making the regional traditional jewelry, Hilda Nuthet, who's still a dear friend of mine, and it's her birthday today.
Oh, happy birthday.
And so I went and worked for her as an apprentice. And then later, so that's how I got my start in this traditional Norwegian folk jewelry. And then later studied with another silversmith during some consecutive summers. So I kept going every year.
Yeah.
And then I started teaching there. But I really became interested in this idea of an oral tradition and what it meant to learn something within an oral tradition. And so it's akin to learning a visual language. So like any language, you need to learn the grammar, the syntax, and everything that it can be and do within these boundaries of a tradition, which makes it what it is. And some people might think that that is a limiting experience, but I find it quite delimiting. And when you look at everything that a tradition can be and do, just like if you're an English speaker and you're writing poetry, everyone's using the same language, but everyone is writing a different
Expressing
poem.
things in different ways. Yeah.
So I find it really incredible, but also when you're working within a folk tradition, you're stepping into a magical universe because it is related to all these folk beliefs.
Right.
And so
what was the most surprising thing along that line that you were like, oh,
just that it all seems so natural at how symbiotic the traditions there are with the music, the dancing. It all fits together in a very logical, beautiful way. And it support each different tradition supports the other, I would say, and has millions of different ways of expressing within the tradition. So variations within. So you're not making historical replicas per se. So you are working within these boundaries,
but it's always an evolution.
It's an evolution, but very slow. You can recognize these things as traditional, but just like in American, folk music, everyone knows certain folk songs, but they sing like the cuckoo, but everyone sings it their own way.
Right.
And but this tradition runs parallel then to my contemporary work. So the two work intertwined side by side. It's really hard to pull them apart, yet they are very different in their aesthetic, in that the traditional work is very ornate. It's using filigree, very ornate filigree, And my contemporary work is very restrained. So it's always a question for me of what a piece or an idea needs. And some work needs to be super ornate, and some work requires restraint.
Right.
And where along that continuum do you fall, or what does the idea need? So
Right.
that's what I'm always asking myself.
Well, in both worlds, I
Yeah.
would think. Yeah. So you've got your traditional vocabulary that you're using, and then writing your own poetry.
Yes, that's for the traditional work.
Right.
And that is different than my contemporary work.
Still writing your own poetry though.
Yes.
But using it in a different song, perhaps, rather
Yeah,
than
it's quite different though, I
Yeah.
would say.
Yeah.
But both, the traditional work in Norway is quite lovely. And I'm very happy I went down that path. And then later I went on to get a master's degree. But first I went to do this, and I'm really glad I did, because it informs really everything I do.
Right. Well, and it gives you a focus for grad school. It gives you a craftsman base before you even start down that master's path, and do that kind of research and hone in on something like a thesis for grad school.
Right.
But yeah, it's interesting talking about the restraint in your contemporary artwork, because I think of it as so rich and deep. It has so much it's rich and deep, and to me it seems so complex in its simplicity, and it's elegant in its simplicity. But it's like space. It's like the closer you get to it and look at it, the more you discover there. So I think with some of the traditional work, you can kind of see it a little more face value, because it's all right there. But the contemporary stuff, like you said, it's more restrained, and it's like in the piece rather than on it. Is that?
Yes, I think of my contemporary work as being a contemplative practice, and that I'm interested in the materiality of it, and that, yes, you do discover more and more. And it does coincide with what I write about it. I would say my contemporary work is very research-based. And so the two things fit together, not always in a literal way, but it informs the work my research does.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it's hard for people to see the difference between things like the traditional work, contemporary work, commission work, production work, across the board for anyone. And being able to find the synthesis of those things and pull that stuff together. But do you think of them very differently?
All of my different practices, the commission work, the exhibition work, the traditional work, my research, my teaching, is all, I would say, inextricably intertwined. Yet they each have their own requirements, and they each need their own focus, but they are very intertwined and interdependent.
They're like family.
And yes,
they're like
and they very much so, and they definitely inform each other. So my work doing research is informed from my work as a maker, and vice versa. And the same with my so-called production work. I really love those design problems, pure design problems. And then the exhibition work, I'm usually thinking about a particular idea or related ideas. And then the work functions within those ideas.
Right. Wow. Cool. Oh my gosh.
Joyce commented
what'd she
in the
say?
chat. She said she really likes how the art history flows into the metalsmith art.
Yeah.
And then Annie, in the context of the making tools, commented, I took an anti-plastic raising class where we had to make our own stakes. That was one of the most interesting parts of the class. And having made the tools, I felt like I really understood the curves in each stake, the relationship between the diameter of the rod and the size of the curve, and how that related to the shape being raised.
Yeah, I think the relationship between, especially tools that you know or that you made, and that relationship between what you're doing and the tool, why it's shaping that way, or why things are forming the way that they do, or if you've made a stamp and are doing repoussé and chasing, and you can change the way that it's striking the metal because you understand the shape that it's made and why, right?
Because you made
tool. The tool, yeah.
I think more than that, although that is interesting, it isn't really a focus or an interest of mine.
Right.
But I can use that as a metaphor for the research that I do. And I often call this false work, where you build the wood structure underneath an archway or a bridge, and it determines and it supports the bridge, but then the false work is removed.
Yeah.
But it still haunts the place that it used to be.
Yeah.
And I think of my research as that it's not this literal overbearing thing, but it's always around the work. It's always an integral part of the work, but I don't want it to be heavy-handed. It needs to be a little bit invisible. And that's sort of how I feel about technique as well. I'm not really interested in virtuosity or being a master of anything. I'm more interested in the idea of intimacy with materials, with tools, with ideas, and getting as close to them as I can. And that is the thing that concerns me more than, for example, virtuosity or techniques that show off. I'd rather have my techniques. Now, obviously, with the traditional work, it's pretty wow with all the filigree and everything. And it's supposed to be for it to do the thing it's supposed to do. But with my contemporary work, my exhibition work, I would say that the technical part is much quieter, and I want it to completely disappear because that isn't the point of the work.
I refer to that as the art of the unseen. Yeah. So whether it's the research or the structure or the thing that you have to take away to allow it to be what it is.
Right.
Yeah. Working sort of in the art of the unseen. It's there.
Yeah, that's a nice way to put it. Yeah, I'm very interested in the unseen.
Yeah,
Most
absolutely.
definitely.
And I like the idea of it like haunting that object, whether it's the mark the tool leaves or the mark that the artist has, imposed just by their hand. It is a relationship.
The unseen or the haunting, I think that's what is apparent with the restraint. When you use restraint, there you feel that the artist has used restraint. There's something there that you feel that other things were eliminated. And that can add a compelling factor or a tension in a good way, I think, to the work.
There's I find that especially in things that have been shaped by hand in a lot of work, whether it's metal vessels or ceramic vessels. There are pieces that are thousands of years old, and you can put your hands on it and you can feel the hand of the artist in those pieces. And
it's remarkable.
It really is. Because you're like, oh, this is where they are. It's not like
it's imbued with that. And that's one of the things that why I have such a focus and love for the medieval period, because the hand of the maker is definitely there. And that it reveals a devotional making that I'm interested in. But the materiality of the work is very present. It's very apparent, the making in the wood pieces, the metal pieces. And
a great example of that in one of your pieces with it has all the A's on it.
The necklace that was in my last exhibition.
Yes. Talk about that piece a little bit.
Well, that piece I made while I was a guest professor in Norway, and I had an exhibition. But during the pandemic, when I was not really where it was harder to make some big piece, I just sat and made these A's. And in the Middle Ages, the Gothic A, was considered a powerful amulet. It stood for Amor Vincit Omnia, love conquers all, but also Ave Maria. So it's an invocation to the divine feminine. And it was, you see it covering bridal crowns, you see it on medieval cups, you see it in embroidery. It's you have to be sort of where's Waldo looking for it, but it often appears in paintings and different places. So I was very interested in the amuletic quality of this letter. And so I made hundreds of them by hand, of course. And I say, of course, because people kept asking me why I didn't get them laser cut.
Well, they're all different.
But it's a different thing, because also while I was making them, I only chanted the Amor Vincit Omnia. And so, which gets to the point that my work is very propositional. It's about asking a question. It's about, I would say, the subjunctive, the what if or the as if. So what if you did this in this way? What does it give to the work? And so then eventually I sewed all of these A's onto a piece. And so for those of you who want to see it, it's on my Instagram account. So it's hundreds of these packed onto this piece. So it's what I would consider a magical piece. Each letter is then sewed onto this with a magical knot. And what I've been told when people try it on is that the memory of it lingers. It impresses itself into your body.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what is one of the most powerful things of medieval art, is it is reciprocal. It asks something of the viewer. It doesn't, it's not a stand back, disinterested aesthetic. It compels you to do something, it asks something from you. And this was my experience when I first studied art history many, many years ago. I studied art history in Lund at the University of Lund in Sweden. So I got to travel in Europe quite a bit. And this was my sense about these small scale works of art, is that they were participatory. They had a fluidity and a poetry between the written word, because it's often inscribed,
Mm-hmm.
the imagery, and the objects themselves. And there's a slippage between the sacred and the secular, between subject and object. And these are all things that are, of course, talked about today in today's philosophy. So it's very relevant, the different aspects of medieval art. It's very much embedded in our contemporary world and our contemporary art. It usually is an installation. It's usually something that you react to and reciprocate with. And plus it's just very beautiful and intimate.
So when you were sort of discovering this, if you can think back to that moment when you're like sort of overcome with it or thought about it or in its presence, what did you have that aha moment that you were like, oh, this is it. I need to go down this rabbit hole and never come out.
There was something I recognized, this idea of devotional making and ritualizing practice and practicing ritual, which is definitely a big part of my work. And
which are two different things.
Yeah.
To be sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it goes on a continuum, definitely. And I knew that it was something I wanted to participate in myself. And when I look back at my experience growing up in the jewelry business, of course, the jewelry was beautiful and all that, but it was the magical quality of the jewelry that intrigued me. The stories people told about their jewelry, the millions of stories of things being lost and then found, the one earring lost and then found, the ring lost and found. I mean, jewelry has its own will and its own desire, and it does what it wants. And it asks something of you. And as a maker, it asks something of me. And it isn't, and that's the other part of this idea of the slippage between subject and object. And why I stay away from the word mastery is that it is definitely something that is a collaborative effort with the materials and with the piece. And that it's telling you and you're telling it, you're working together in this intimate way with it. The other thing about the medieval jewelry that just you asked, if I remember a moment. Well, I do remember going to the British Museum and there was a brooch that said, I am love and I cause men to love, or something like that. So there are all these objects, church bells, brooches, all sorts of things that have first person inscriptions on them. So these pieces are subjects, and they are telling the person who's interacting with them what to do or what to think of them. So they're animated in this way. And that is one of the things that got me so interested in non-Western jewelry, is this idea of activation, or when something is sacralized. And what is that moment? And I think about that a lot, because that is the thing that makes something powerful, and what makes some things more powerful than other things.
Right. I know that in some Asian cultures, that once a tool or an object has lived more than 100 years, it is considered to have its own soul and can become demon, monster, creature, life of it. It has a life of its own. And there are all kinds of tales of these things sort of, having their own journey and their own spirit.
Yeah. And now, of course, we're living in a time of people focusing on object agency, and everybody is discussing this in an academic format. But this is something that was very prevalent in the Middle Ages, that objects and subjects blurred, and that objects had their own agency, their own will, their own desire. They could be proxies for
their
people, their own power. And that always was intriguing to me, as was the stories that I grew up with in the jewelry business. And so I grew up knowing that these things, have a power. I had a friend a while back who returned a piece of jewelry to me, saying that I hadn't given it to her with the right feeling or something. And I had to really laugh at that, because jewelry scares me too much to not give it with a full heart or full intention. I would never do that, because I do believe in its inherent power.
Yeah.
And so you wouldn't give a gift of jewelry in a manipulative way or in an offhand way. It has to be fully respected.
Absolutely. Yeah. When I was casting, the caster that I was working with has a very deep belief that the glass, because it does the same thing, and metal, when it's cast, maintains the vibrations of everything around it. Its crystal structure freezes in that moment in time. And so it's a memory of what happened, what was going on in that moment when it was made. Which definitely speaks to that fact that it's like, if you're, what was it, like water for chocolate, where if you're putting bad intent into the food, it will show up later.
It will show up. It will show up. I do believe that.
So I know that he definitely will respect that moment
and
when it's being made.
It is about respect, and in a post-enlightenment world where many things are separated out and there are binary oppositions of gender, objects, everything, science, nature, all of these things, which of course is being obliterated now in today's philosophies. But these were all things that were very porous boundaries in the Middle Ages, which is what I'm interested in. And it isn't an anachronistic way of being in the world. It's about looking at another period of time and understanding, exploring a different modality in the world, a different way of being in the world.
Right.
That's what's interesting to me about that period, or studying that period.
Yeah. Oh,
Annie has a question.
what's Annie got to say?
Yes.
Annie wants to know, she says, curious if you have read two authors, Lewis Hyde, especially his book, The Gift, Creativity and the Artist in the Modern World, and also Robertson Davies' work, especially The Rebel Angels. Robertson Davies is a Canadian author. Really beautiful
I know about
fiction.
Hyde and The Gift. I
Mhm.
don't know about the second one.
It's been a long time since I've read The Rebel Angels, so I would not.
Is it a
It's fiction. It's fiction.
Yeah, I read very little fiction.
What do you like to read?
Medieval art history.
Yeah. Yep.
Um,
Yeah. No, I get that. I get it.
that's pretty much.
Oh my gosh.
Joyce commented that she loves the idea that pieces have value and are not given without your whole heart,
Yes.
and loves the like water for chocolate reference, which I do
Yeah.
too. You know, the magical realism of
Yeah.
Central America is very dear to my heart.
Yeah. The magic realism is very present, I would say, in my work.
What one of the things I love about your studio, I mean, it's like I said, it's an intimate, wonderful sanctum of
Oh, thank
just,
you.
it's awesome. Is your table,
Yes.
because your table is your sketchbook,
Mhm.
correct?
Mhm.
And you've constantly got things that are sort of in motion.
Mhm.
Some of them take a longer time than others to come
Mhm.
together. And I, because I also work with a lot of mixed materials, I know that
Yes, you
sometimes
do.
they kind of attract themselves
They do.
in different
They
ways.
fall
and
in love.
they do, yeah.
They fall in love.
And so you have these pieces that you're like, you want to go on a blind date with this one? And
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
no, I do not. And walks right off. But can you talk a little bit about your table and the sketchbook that you have going on here? Yeah, Julie, you want to?
Yeah.
What do we got going on?
I was going back to our family business. I was raised thinking I was going to be a jewelry designer and work with the goldsmith and all that. And I did that for a number of years and I loved it. And we had an incredible goldsmith at our store. And so I learned back, and this is of course before computers and CAD. So I learned how to do vellum pen and ink drawings and
I'm gonna
perspective
come around
drawings
over here so we can-
with right angles and that kind of thing. And so I was trained to do intricate renderings, but I do drawings, most definitely, but I usually lay things out and collage them. And some things, some ideas, I'm just not ready to take on. I would say there are some things that take years to figure out the conceptual backing of it, not so much the technical part, but how it wants to be, how it wants to come together. And sometimes I just don't have everything I need to make the thing. And so
It hasn't come along.
It hasn't
Or you
come
haven't
along.
made it, or
Yeah, and I can think of different bodies of work, like my body of work called Conjugation, which was a performative piece. I got the idea for that piece probably when I was in grade school. It was something that I had experienced, and it took me 50 years to make the piece. Because I didn't have everything I needed to make it come.
So for those out there that are seeing this, and it's such a beautiful what's the word? Assemblage of charcoal. What, and all of these materials are very different. You've got wood and sponge and netting and metal and and slate. There are all kinds of different things in here, and lead. Yeah. How do you, for people that don't understand working with a variety of materials like this, what draws you to these different materials? I know part of it is their imbued sense of.
Some of it has, some of the materials definitely fall into the category of natural magic, that they inherently I need to stand here.
Just go over and sit down and then we can see you.
Okay.
Oh, here.
Oh, I see.
There we go. Yeah. Let me grab this.
So of course, wood
Sorry.
and jet, I use jet, is considered powerful and has inherent characteristics that do different things. And so I collect these things, I call it an apothecary that I draw from. And then I put the things together like a remedy or a spell that is for something. And so just like you would do a remedy, certain things need to come together and be together for the piece to be efficacious for the idea. And as you see, I work with a single palette, but that the things have a very different texture or weight to them.
They do. It's always fascinating to me that anytime I look at what you have here on the table, whether it's the natural objects or things that look like they are metal or paper or mica. It's the weight to me is always an illusion.
Mhm.
Anytime I'm looking at your work, because you think it's going to be as light as tissue paper,
Yeah.
some of these pieces,
But
which
they're
I
not.
had assumed. I was like, it's going to be as light as tissue paper. Oh, it's lead. Then they're just, the most beautifully formed pieces or something like this. I'm like, expect to be heavy. It's like, oh, it's super light.
Yeah.
How does, when you're working with that, is that something that you're aware of? Is it something
Yes,
that you're,
most definitely. I'm
Yeah.
thinking of weights and proportions.
and the illusion of that?
Maybe
kind
not,
of-
maybe not the illusion, but the things definitely have different weights and proportions that are similar to something. My work really isn't about something. I think of my work as being devices or tools.
Mhm.
And that the materials, well, the last exhibition I had was called Similitudes, and these are similitudes of other things,
Mhm.
experiences, or like I've talked about quite a bit is sympathetic magic, that something of equal weight needs to be used to counter something else, or something similar needs to be used to represent something else.
Mhm.
So I'm trying to get very close to something through its likeness or through its weight or through its measurement. And so I am definitely thinking more along those lines. And then of course the materiality, the things that want to be together, the netting and the lead and how these things can counter each other.
With the, 'cause I know I'm looking at some of this and I realize like these are paper.
Yes.
And so there is paper here that are models for things
Yeah,
as well.
I
So
use
you work out
I use a
models that
lot
way.
of paper models, and but then again, like I said, I collage things
Mhm.
together.
I love the idea of doing paper models, and a lot of, I think, students become a little frustrated, feel like it's distracting in some way. And I always encourage them. I'm like, make a paper model
Yeah.
because it can really help you work out more than you know. Once
I
you
think so
started
too.
doing it.
Yeah, I really encourage my students when I'm teaching an undergraduate class to work through things with paper models. I think drawing is a indispensable skill,
Mhm. Yeah.
but combining that with paper models can be really valuable. And that's what I mean about collaging these things together. And I make a lot of things that I then take apart.
Right.
I will go ahead and make a whole piece that I then take apart. And sometimes you just need to do that.
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah. It's like, well, that didn't work. Or it did,
Or
and
it
it's lived
did.
its life.
Right.
And it needs to go off and do
or
something
it just
else.
needs to be different.
Mhm.
And so I don't get frustrated in that way when I need to take something apart. I just do it.
Right.
Joyce said that paper models just made such a difference for her.
It's true. It's really true. It's, I mean,
Once
just
you become a convert.
yeah, once you
you
start
never go
putting
back.
together, once you start putting together the scale, the size, the logistics of what you've got to do, put
Yeah.
something together,
Yeah.
it makes great sense. So, and I love that your paper models are graphite as well, or that
Yeah,
nice
I would
beautiful rich black.
usually make them the color that they're going to be, but I also do a lot of writing around the work when I need to solve a problem or get to a place. I'll write around the work
Mhm.
and do a sort of call and response.
Okay.
So I'll write about what I'm working on and then look at the writing. So in like an automatic writing. So in a sort of a surrealist way of working. I think that's really valuable. And I try to teach that
Appreciate
to
that.
students as well.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Oh my gosh. Where are we time-wise? How are we doing? Yeah,
It's
doing good.
about 2:45.
Okay. Okay. Here's one. What object have you created? Speaking of taking things apart, what objects have you created that you're really in love with or surprised by when you were finished? Have you had anything that you sort of put together and you're like, oh, that's, and I think sometimes when they come into their being, into their solid piece, sometimes they can surprise you with what they are.
Yeah.
Have you had?
I would
Something
say
like that
going back
recently?
to that A piece, which I can get out. Let me just grab it.
I saw
And I'll
little
just keep
parts of it
talking
over there.
as I'm working something out. I'm not thinking, well, you're just trying to solve the problem and go along with the piece and what it's sort of asking of you. So this is the A necklace that,
Right.
and these are all the A's.
Mhm.
So
And you
I
have
would
some other ones on the
say,
table too.
yeah, I would say,
Oh my gosh. You guys.
I wouldn't use the word I'm in love with this piece. I would say that I feel an intimacy with it because it worked alongside of me while I was far from home, in a challenging situation, getting ready for an exhibition, and it became a companion to me. And I would say that to me, that's the most successful work, is when it becomes a sort of companion and that you're intimate with all of its interworkings.
Yeah, you know each other thoroughly.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's like a friendship. So I would use that word more than being in love with it. I see everything about it. And that is something that's satisfying.
Tell me about the
consoled me.
materials.
This, so it's wool,
Mhm.
silver that's oxidized, and vintage ribbon.
And I know the vintage ribbon was a journey.
Well, for those of you who are from Seattle, the closing of Nancy's sewing basket was a real trauma. It had been around for many, many years and they had vintage ribbon, and I bought all my vintage ribbon there, and then it closed, I think 2 years ago or 3 years ago. And I went and bought as much as I could afford to buy before it closed. And then I started making these pieces that needed more of this vintage ribbon that had a certain sheen and a certain quality that linen and silk and ribbon that you can buy now, contemporary ribbon, just doesn't have.
Right.
I think this is probably rayon. So I flew all the way to New York to this place that I knew had vintage ribbon, and that's where I bought
All of it.
yeah, all of it. Because I was terrified I was never going to get it again. So now I have a stash.
A stash of this.
So yes, I would say I consider these things as something that has consoled me and has helped me understand something.
This has been a partner on a journey that you've had to endure over the last couple of years. That really, it shows that, and you can feel that weight of it in it.
Thank you.
It's, yeah. I wish everyone the opportunity to be able to wear your pieces at
Oh,
some
thank
point,
you.
because they do. There was one I know that you put on me and I was like, it resonates at a very high frequency for me.
Mm.
I could just feel it
Mhm.
either when I put it on.
I think it was this one.
Was it this one? Yeah, because it's like, yeah, I think metal and stones and certain things, they just have this, it's hard to describe, but a
Mhm.
frequency to them.
Well,
that-
I think, and teaching, where I was just, like I said, a guest professor. I was more, I mean, you all are such incredible teachers. And I really tried to focus with the students on not what they were learning, but how they were learning it and why they were learning it. And so we were talking a lot about, of course, they were learning skills, but what are you using these skills for? And that was, to me, that's what gives the work the power, is when it's not just for the sake of learning a skill. Although that can be beautiful too, but
Right.
it's about the why of making.
Not is the intent behind
Mhm.
the practice.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, beautiful stuff. Well, does anybody have any other questions before we go?
There was a little shout out to you from YouTube. Just wanted to pop in and say that it's good to see you again, Lori. Always so interesting to hear you talk about your work. Love from your former student, Julianne.
Oh, Julianne, she's an amazing maker already. She
Yeah.
just posted a traditional buckle that she's making
Mhm.
for her final project
In Norway?
in Norway. And she is going to be a really incredible maker, I believe. But all the students, her cohort
Mhm.
there, they were a really amazing group of students.
Yeah.
And all of them have an inherent talent, but also a devotion to their making. So I
Yeah.
have a lot of hope for them.
That was one of the things that really struck me about the conversation that we were having, about your experience teaching her, that talking about that devotion in that quiet space where they were
Mhm.
working,
Mhm.
because they didn't have the mechanical tools to be able to.
It was a very quiet workshop because
Yes.
there weren't any power tools.
So that you had a sign on the door, or
Yes, the
that's
sign on the door said, devotion fortifies action. And
Right.
that's what we lived by in that workshop.
is your devotion fortifying your action?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I think that a lot of people miss that part. They want to get right to the action, and if there's no action, they're off again.
Or people get bored.
Yeah.
It's jewelry making can be boring. And because it's repetitive, it's slow, it's not like watching a glass blower.
Mhm.
And it takes a lot of tenacity and discipline and focus and devotion.
And devotion, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And also the idea of not doing it to show off, but to engage in a way. Because I do believe, especially now with everything going on, that art can save the world, and that it can
As
be
before.
used. Yes, and that it can be used for all sorts of projects and ways to show what you believe in.
Mhm.
And you see Ukrainian jewelers, I've been following them, what they're doing, and it's really incredible. There's a woman from Belarus who does this incredible traditional cross stitching, but she's using it as a subversive act against the government.
I love
And
this.
it's really incredible. And I'm sure she's putting herself at risk doing it. And you see this all over the world, people using traditional art, folk art, as a way to express subversion.
Subvert
Yeah,
the dominant
to
paradigm.
subvert the dominant paradigm, to protest.
Mhm.
And jewelry is an incredible format for that, because it is this artwork that you take out into a public space on your body, and it invites people into an intimate space to see what
Right.
that message is. And
And you can take it with you everywhere.
everywhere. And so it's a really powerful format. And this is what I try to get my students to understand, is what they're doing is really important.
It has power. It
And-
has presence, and yeah. And I think, that idea of devotion or intent shows when you put that there, and the lack of it shows as well.
Yeah.
Well,
We had a couple of
couple
folks who
other-
were
Oh,
really
yes.
just, thanking you. Joyce wanted to thank you so much and said your work is amazing, and it is neat to hear your journey and how you've gotten here.
Oh, thank
Get
you.
that intimate look on the inside. And Kathleen comments, art can save the world, art saves me.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then we have one question that's more a pragmatic question. Did your family business make flatware? And if so, what was the mark? She says, I have a set of flatware that was my husband's grandmother's from the 1920s, made in Seattle, marked with a Gothic T.
We did not make flatware. We sold flatware, Gorham, several other, Reed and Barton. So we sold a lot of flatware, china, crystal. We were a very traditional jewelry store. And, but we did, we manufactured our own jewelry, did engraving, that kind of thing. But no, we didn't actually produce flatware, but
So
we
that was
repaired.
not Talcott flatware.
No, it wasn't.
Sorry.
No.
And,
Well, yeah, one more.
and Lynn Sigrid Bratland said, thank you so much. I could listen to you all night.
Oh my
Looking
gosh.
forward to the next talk.
Oh my gosh. Well, Lynn Sigrid was my colleague in Norway, and she is incredible. She's an incredible maker and such a fantastic person to work with. And now she's in charge of the students I was working with. So they're in very capable hands.
yes. Love to those students.
Yes, love to my students in Norway, but also my RISD students, which is where I usually teach at Rhode Island School of Design. And love my colleagues there too.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's always so great. It's such a pleasure to come here and see you, and to see your
Little metal
work. And
foxes.
thanks. Yay.
Thank you very much. It was
Thank you.
wonderful.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you all
you,
for
Joyce.
joining us. And you all can, if you want to share this, you can see it on YouTube. So it'll be there for you guys to go back and watch again if you like, or to share with somebody down the road if you want to. So we're hoping to do more in studio interviews with other artists coming up. So stay tuned for that, and do check out our upcoming classes. And thank you, everybody. Have a great afternoon and evening if you're someplace else.
Yes, thank you
And
very
you
much.
so
Little
much.
metal foxes.
Absolutely.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Oh, yay.
Marcella said, wonderful talk. Thank you. And Annie said the same thing, that it was really an amazing talk.
Wonderful.
you.
So thank you, everybody.